Welcome to Functional Philosophy. I'm Charles Tew. That's T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. This is episode number 12, and its title is How to Avoid Being an Idiot Who Thinks Bankers Just Move Numbers Around.
You have these hedge fund managers and these Bernie Madoff twats that are fucking just essentially moving numbers around and making ungodly sums of money. I mean, if you look at the Hamptons, a lot of those fucking people that have these castles out there and then in the castles in Connecticut, you have these people that have just figured out a way to move numbers around. That's all they're doing.
Yeah, they're playing numbers. Tricks with the system, basically.
They're extracting money from a broken system.
Extracting money. That was Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin from Joe Rogan's podcast. This entire episode is inspired by that 15 seconds of stupidity. Bankers, CEOs, and financiers are heroes of abstract thought, and that's why people hate them. You hear people say this all the time. Bankers just move money around. They don't create any wealth. They're just paper shufflers. That is as false as anything can be. If you think that, you are a moron. This just goes to show that improvements in the world depend on individuals going out there and making the case. It's not hard. It's possible. You just need people to do it. Here's what bankers actually do. They don't just sit in an office all day, moving numbers around, what Islam calls invisible wealth. I actually heard Joe Rogan say he was sympathetic to Islam on this point, that they say a lot of things that make sense because Islam bans invisible wealth. Well, I would expect it to because of its primitive savagery. Here's what bankers actually do. They deal with the most complex, the most abstract economic issues in the world. They figure out how to allocate resources to productive ends. You save money. You put it in the bank. The bank has to figure out what to put that money towards in order to get a profit in return. The bank's role is to figure out what ventures, what enterprises, what activities in the economy are likely to be successful and to direct money their way. That is the biggest responsibility there is. The responsibility of directing capital. That's why capitalism is a good name, even though it started off as a derogatory name, like so many names do, but it's a good name. It names something close to the essential of the system. So these bankers take capital and they figure out what's going to be productive. When it is productive, they get paid back with interest, and they share some of that interest with the people who put their savings in the bank. The person who needed money wins. He gets to start a successful venture. The bank wins because they get a return on their investment, on the money they loaned out. And the person who put the money in the bank wins because they also get some of the interest. Everyone wins. Now, tragically funny how stupid leftists are. Because leftists will complain that, oh, in capitalism you get these entrenched companies, and who's going to be able to challenge Walmart or these big pharmaceutical companies? They just get entrenched and capitalism has monopolies. And then in the same breath, oh, bankers are leeches who just take money from people and shuffle it around and steal a great deal in the process. No, moron. Bankers are what solve that problem of, quote, monopolies. You're just too stupid to understand it, or too dishonest to have looked it up. Yeah, it's true. Some guy who has a great idea doesn't have the money to challenge big companies. That's why banks exist. That's how they make their money. The guy with the money says, this guy really could challenge Apple, Microsoft, Walmart, whatever. He's got a good idea. Let's give him a bunch of money to challenge the entrenched system. They have an incentive to do it because if the venture is successful, they make money. That is how entrenched businesses are overcome. That is why there is no valid concern about economies of scale never being able to be challenged. Yeah, they can be challenged. That's what banks do. That's what banks enable. What bankers do is what leftists want the government to do. It's what they claim the free market can't do on its own. We need government planning. We need the government to figure out what we should invest in. We need to invest more in schools. We need to invest more in healthcare. We need to invest more in that. Now, you'll notice they always say we need to invest more in everything good, as if anyone who's against that is just being a Grinch for no reason. As if everybody could just be given $1 million and everything would be fine, but just mean old Republicans want to maintain an artificial hierarchy and want some people to remain poor. So no, we don't want the government giving people free money, even though it would totally work and be practical. I mean, if you don't see the problem with that, I have nothing to say to you. But this is another reason why the left hates bankers. Because bankers actually do what they claim the government is supposed to do. And of course they do it, I can't even say infinite times better. They actually do it and the government doesn't. They allocate resources according to their most productive uses. Now, why can they do that when the government can't? Because when the banks do it, it's all motivated by self-interest. It's all motivated by individual values. So it's all necessarily going to what people actually want. That's what profit is a measure of. It's a measure of how much value you created, because you've created what people actually want. And when the government does it, it's all selfless. Well, what do you think you get when you run a system according to selflessness? Sacrifice. That's the whole point. The destruction of wealth. Because the government doesn't invest more to create value. It invests it according to a morality of self-sacrifice. Big surprise that doesn't work economically. Big surprise it doesn't create wealth. Bankers deal with the most abstract issues. People think they don't create anything because they're not working in a factory creating a widget. But they enable the factory creating the widget. The factory worker is creative. He has to understand an abstract chain of reasoning in order to work the machines he's working. The banker has to understand entire industries in order to do his job. Bankers are the most heroic, most rational, most intelligent people in our society. That is, incidentally, why the World Trade Center was attacked. Why do you think Osama bin Laden targeted the World Trade Center? Because it was the symbol of finance. It was the symbol of Western selfish capitalism, of individualism, of productiveness, of material wealth creation, of abstract rational thought, of reason. Muslims hate that. Muslims hate all those things because they're primitive, evil savages. And I mean all of them, to the extent they take Islam seriously. I don't mean a fringe. Now, I want to deal with another issue you often hear people talk about, and it's that spending creates wealth. When you give people money, they spend it. That's how people get money. That stimulates companies to produce more things because they're getting money for producing those things. I don't know how you could have this mentality. It's worse than common sense. If you just brought common sense to bear on economics, you wouldn't come up with an idea that stupid. Now, economics is complicated. I'm not saying you should understand it all just from common sense, but you shouldn't be retarded. Savings is what creates wealth, not spending. People say this all the time, we're a consumer-driven economy. No, we're not. No economy is. That's impossible. How do you create wealth by consuming it? You don't. You create wealth by investing it, which means saving it, which means putting it in the bank so the bank invests in productive ventures. That's how wealth is created. If you have wealth, you don't create more wealth by buying the things a factory produces. You create it by investing that wealth in a factory to create more of those things. Money is not the starting point. Wealth is. You can't consume unless you create. You know Say's law? Jean-Baptiste Say? Production creates its own demand. You cannot demand something unless you have something to trade. When you demand something, it means you're willing to trade wealth you've created for the thing. So we can't be a demand-driven economy, because there is no demand without production. What are you demanding? On what basis are you demanding something? Nothing. Unless it's paper money, because the government has interfered with the system and confused everyone by mucking everything up. They can't confuse everyone for long, but they can do it somewhat. What would it even mean to have a demand-driven economy? It would mean people start creating things because you want them. That's not what happens. They create things because they want them. Or they want something you have created, so they produce something to trade for what you've produced. It's all production. Production comes first. Demand can't come first. If you were on a desert island with one other person, and that guy said, I want some fish, would you just go out and catch some fish for him? No. You would only catch fish if he created a shelter and said, I'll let you use this shelter in exchange for your fish. It is no different when it's 320 million people or whatever. Doesn't matter how many people you get, same principle. But people don't understand this because they don't know how to abstract. As more and more data gets involved, they just, at a certain point, float away. It just becomes foggy, fuzzy. They don't know what they're thinking about anymore. And so they get all of these bizarre, illogical ideas. Because they lose the plot. They lose the thread. This is why it's so important to concretize. Go back to concretes. Think about what you're saying. If you think demand drives the economy, take that literally. What does that mean? It means people do things in exchange for paper. Because the government prints paper that doesn't represent any actual wealth. It means people do things because you want them to. No, they do things because you have something to give them in return for what they produce. Bankers are vilified because they, almost alone, don't let the abstraction get away from them. They understand at the highest level how to direct money. They're not like the rest of the savages who can't conceive of production after it goes out of view. There is a literal parallel here to object permanence. They don't see it? It's just paper shuffling. What does it mean? It's just like saying, an engineer doesn't do anything. What's all that math he's doing to build the bridge? We don't need all that math. That's just invisible. It doesn't do anything. Well, try to build a bridge without math, and you'll see what all that just moving numbers around means. Leftists don't understand banking because they're Marxists, which means materialists. They don't believe in ideas or abstract thought. Although Marx had a beautiful passage about the power of abstract thought relating to bees. You should look it up. It's good. But it contradicts the essence of his system, so people throw it out. The right, so-called right, doesn't understand banking because they believe in the invisible hand, quote-unquote. The invisible hand is one of the worst ideas ever. Now, I love Adam Smith, not his morality or treatise on morality, but, I mean, in his context, a genius. But the invisible hand, that is the same as Hesiod's view of Zeus. You know, this idea that, well, it seems that when people do good things, they get rewarded for it, and bad actions tend to result in bad things. How can we conceptualize that? How does that happen? Well, before people understood principles and natural law, which actually they still don't understand, but they had to make it mystical. It had to be the result of providence, of a consciousness, of somebody up there weighing, checking, going back and forth, making sure, okay, this guy was just, I'm going to move things in his direction. This guy was bad, I'm going to move things against him. So Zeus was the ultimate arbiter of justice because people couldn't conceptualize cause and effect as the actual arbiter of justice. It couldn't be natural yet. Now, it started to become natural with Thales and the beginning of philosophy. But in terms of capitalism, people don't understand the cause and effect relationships involved. I mean, you can see this in Adam Smith, who was not particularly pro-selfishness, to put it lightly. Of course, somebody who's against selfishness isn't going to be able to make sense of the fact that being selfish works, that it's practical, because when you have a moral ideal, it, one way or another, to be psychologically whole, you have to believe that it works, that it's practical, that it works in this world somehow. But to someone who doesn't understand the principles involved and who believes selfishness is evil, of course, well, it can't work because of any kind of natural cause and effect, any kind of natural principle involved in selfishness. So it's the invisible hand. And you hear conservatives to this day say, what is the invisible hand but the hand of God, directing our vices for good? Now, if that's your view, you're never going to defend capitalism. Capitalism is not the result of God intervening in our base nature for positive ends. So leftists don't understand abstraction. Religionists don't understand abstraction. You know who understands abstraction? Certainly not today's philosophers. Bankers understand it. You know, if I were going to be trapped on a desert island with only 3 kinds of people, I would choose authors, Jews, and bankers. And Jews are often bankers, which is why Jews are hated, by the way. Jews are hated for their virtues. They're hated because they're wrapped up in banking, because they were, as a culture, I don't believe in any inherent genetic difference there, but culturally, they were and are creative, intellectual, ambitious, industrious. They're traditionally in banking. They're traditionally a little less mystical, or they're less mystical now. But, you know, other religions, usury is banned. You can't charge interest. Well, that stops capitalism dead because you're not allowed to make a return on investment in productive enterprises. So why are you going to loan money if you can't get anything back for it? It would be selfish to get something back for it. So we have to ban that, of course. Well, guess what? When you allow selfishness, production happens. When you ban it, production doesn't happen. So Jews ran the banks because they could be usurers, and a damn good thing, too. You know, Nazis are funny because if there were a master race, it would be Jews. Now, I don't believe in a master race, of course. I don't think there's any serious genetic differences between any race. I mean, physiological ones. But if you were going to make that kind of primitive, racist mistake, you could not avoid the conclusion that Jews are, as a group, superior to everyone else. Now, I'm not Jewish at all. But if I were going to be on an island with 3 kinds of people, Jews would be one of those kinds. And bankers, as I said, because they understand abstractions. I said authors because authors are basically applied psychologists. Psychology as a field is basically worthless today. Ayn Rand used to say it's in the state that philosophy was in at the time of Thales. You have some crude observations, that's it. Now, some people say Freud was the Plato of psychology. In other words, he wrapped together all the basic issues, and it would be an apt comparison because Plato was also wrong on the essence of every question, but even getting them together was a feat of staggering genius. I'm not sure that applies to Freud, but I'm not a psychologist, or at least I'm not a theoretical one. And I think theoretical psychology is basically useless today. People don't know what the hell they're talking about. But authors have to be good psychologists because they make convincing characters. So I think authors are better at psychology than professional psychologists. And I think that would be a very interesting kind of person to have on an island. For reasons other than just their psychological prowess, but that's one reason. Anyway, so hatred of bankers and a total misunderstanding of what they do is a result of our disintegrated culture. People hate integration. Why do they hate integration? Well, they hate it because of Immanuel Kant. You can draw a straight line from him to the culture of today. That's a whole course, but in brief, Kant said, the way we see the world, not just through our senses, which philosophers have long said, deceive us, they artificially construct what we perceive. Kant applied that to logic, to abstraction. The way we think about the world is artificial, is caused by the structure of our minds. So our minds automatically put things together in a certain artificial way that doesn't reflect the way reality really is. So if you want to get at how reality really is, deconstruct. You know the whole law random thing, the whole penguin of doom thing? That is Kant. Now, I love this kind of thing because this is the kind of relationship your average person would never draw, can't understand. And this is what Ayn Rand makes possible. What attracts people to Ayn Rand is thinking in principles, is the idea of connecting things. Everything is connected. Banking is connected to sex. Sex is connected to building your PC. Building your PC is connected to how you choose your career. How you choose your career is connected to justice. Justice is connected to what kind of movies you prefer. What kind of movies you prefer is connected to your view of integration. Your view of integration is connected to whether you're cynical or pessimistic. Everything is connected. Now, I don't even know the connection between some of the things I just said, but I know they're connected. Somebody wants to ask me how, you can send in a question, and I guarantee I can connect logically and plausibly. Not just plausibly, they are connected. I won't just be making some superficial subjective case. I won't just be fashioning that out of thin air. Everything is connected. So that whole penguin of doom thing, that trite internet law random, symbol of law random everybody hates, that's Kant. Because what does that mean? It means I'm dancing to the beat of my own drum. Not a rational drum. A rational drum? Psh, that's simplistic. That makes sense. And we all know real reality defies logic. Logic is just, that's what our mind forces onto the world. So if you're really in touch with the truth, what you think, what you do, what you say is illogical. Now, whoever said the penguin of doom thing obviously did not read Kant, but philosophers control the world. She would not have been that way if Kant had not written The Critique of Pure Reason. Bankers would not be hated if he had not written The Critique of Pure Reason. I would not need to do this episode if Kant had not written The Critique of Pure Reason. And don't think that makes me glad he wrote it. I could be spending my time on much greater issues than this. And I hope enough of you will get to the stage where you can benefit from my highest level of understanding. But that's a big problem. You know, people like Sam Harris lament the fact that they have to spend so much time criticizing religion and Islam because there's so much more they could be doing. Well, Sam Harris is not, he's not a great thinker, but even he has better uses for his time than than arguing against ideas that, by all right, that have just no standing. No one should have to waste his time arguing against the delusions of primitive desert dwellers. But anyway, there's so much more I could be talking about. My hope is that some of you, enough of my audience, will get on my level, as they say, and actually become capable of benefiting from what I do at the highest level. There are books and courses that answer all of those questions. Give the true, correct answer to all of those questions people think can't be answerable. What's the meaning of life? Does God exist? Those questions are relatively easy. There is so much that could be done. There are books and courses out there that I think probably maybe 10 people on Earth fully understand. Now, that is a tragedy. I don't want to continue building this tower higher and higher and higher, pushing the boundaries of calculus while everybody else is arguing over whether the fundamentals of arithmetic are valid. Get up here. Join me up here. Be like the bankers. Understand abstraction. Start thinking in principle. So, people hate bankers because bankers think in abstractions. They integrate the economy. They make the most massive integrations in economics. And people today are taught to hate integration. So, they hate all of its representatives. And its greatest representatives in economics are bankers. People talk all the time about how no one was prosecuted for the financial crisis. No bankers were prosecuted. There's no one in jail. Well, there shouldn't be anyone in jail. Well, there should be government officials in jail, politicians in jail, bureaucrats in jail, and certain bankers who colluded with them. They're not all heroes, but many of them are. And the only reason we're doing as well as we are is because certain bankers are moral heroes and go out there and create all this wealth and make everything possible, despite being hated by savages who are too stupid to understand any of the heroic actions of bankers. So far from accepting the opprobrium they were subjected to for their heroism, they should have demanded medals. Like when Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and brought to trial, and they asked him, "What penalty do you think you deserve?" And he said, "Free meals at the Prytaneum." The Prytaneum was a public building that had lodging and food for people from out of town. He said, "My penalty should be free food there, because I didn't do anything wrong. In fact, I provided a service, so you should reward me." That's what bankers should have done, because they provided a service to people who were too stupid and immoral and vicious to appreciate them. Anybody who says bankers just move numbers around, you can be sure that person is an imbecile, and there's not much point talking to him, because he doesn't understand abstractions. He's not a real thinker. He's closer to an ape than a human being. So I hope some of you will now appreciate bankers more. They are responsible for all of the wealth we have. Whatever you're listening to me on, they built that. We should do away with Labor Day and have Bankers' Day. If anyone deserves it, it's bankers. Bankers' Day and Columbus Day. Those are the two best holidays. I don't really celebrate many holidays. Columbus Day I celebrate. And I would celebrate Bankers' Day too. So, anyway, hate people who hate bankers, and more importantly, love bankers. They are heroes who make our standard of living possible. They represent the best of humanity. Now for the Q&A section. I have 2 more questions today. The first one is regarding something I said about the fact that I listen to a lot of garbage. I listen to many podcasts that I consider worthless for purposes of actually learning what the participants in the discussions intend you to learn. And I consume all kinds of media on the internet. Everything from slightly anti-social justice movie reviews to leftist video game shows. I listen to things on all kinds of subjects and watch things on all kinds of subjects from all different perspectives. Now, why do I do that? Well, if you've ever read Watchmen, the Alan Moore comic, you may remember Vaight's wall of TVs. Now, what he's doing with that wall of TVs, which are a bunch of CRT TVs, and they're all displaying something different. Cartoons, news shows, documentaries, stuff from the culture. What he's doing with that is he's trying to identify cultural trends, abstract similarities between all these different cultural products. Now, that's exactly how I think of what I'm doing. That's exactly why I watch all of this garbage. I do it to see how the culture is moving. If you just watch one thing, you may see something idiosyncratic, or it's just a quirk of that. But if you see the same things start to pop up everywhere, then you know it's a real phenomenon. You know the extent of the phenomenon. For instance, it would be hard to say that the culture is moving toward social justice if you didn't watch many different things. You may just think it's the things you're watching. But if you watch all different kinds of media on all different subjects from all different perspectives, then you can identify, okay, this is applying regardless of subject and regardless of where somebody stands on social or political issues. Everyone is moving one step to the left. You can only identify that if you look at many sources of media. So, Vate's wall of TVs, that's what I always think of. That's what I'm doing. I always have something on. I want to know how people think, what the popular distortions of the culture are. Because I love teaching. I consider myself a philosopher, and part of being a philosopher, I think it's redundant to say that one is a philosopher and a teacher. Being a philosopher is being a teacher. That's the product you create. There's no point in just thinking about the world and not doing anything with it. What you create as a philosopher is the teaching you provide to other people. So I have an interest, a passion for knowing how people are thinking, how I can help them, what's going on in the world. So that's why I watch a lot of trash. You can gain something from listening to stupid people. It's like studying a savage tribe in the jungle. They can't teach you anything, but you can learn from them. Question number 2. I once said that art must be separate from the observer, which is why VR isn't conducive to art, because it puts you in the world. It isn't art until it's objective. It has to exist out there, in the world, for it to be the kind of thing that serves the purpose art does. It's the same reason you can fall in love only with another person and not yourself, even though what you're looking for is, as Aristotle said, your soul in another body. You have to see it out there, external to you, existing without your influence. Now the questioner says, he asks, whether a musician playing music can experience his own output as art, if the player of a VR experience can't. Isn't this an example of how what I'm saying doesn't make sense? Well, the musician can experience his own output as art to the extent he's playing from a plan in an automatized way, and not in the process of creating art. In that context, the part of him that's experiencing art is separated from the part creating it, which is functioning without his conscious input. Even creating art can be experienced as art to the extent that you can view your subconscious doing the work independently of your conscious mind. That happens all the time. For instance, when I spell a long word, I don't even know what my subconscious is doing. I can observe in the moment my subconscious feeding my mouth words, and I don't know consciously what's coming next. Spelling a word is an art, but that same phenomenon manifests when you write a scene or create some new piece of music. Now, in a sense, your subconscious feeds you everything, because you don't choose your specific thoughts, but the difference is something you've surely experienced when writing. It's the difference between letting your subconscious have free rein and just writing, or editing as you go. If you're doing the former, and the output is artistic, then you can experience it as art in the moment, as you're creating it. If you are consciously involved in its creation as you go, however, then it doesn't have the objective reality required by art. If I'm writing an essay and letting myself go, then I feel as if the essay already exists in some sense. Whereas if I edit as I go, then what I'm creating doesn't exist yet, because I'm not pulling it from my subconscious, but creating it consciously. If you have any questions or any love mail for bankers, you can send me an email at charles.a.2@gmail.com. You can also check out my website at charlestew.com. There you'll find information on and links to all of my work, including ways to support it if you're interested. Bankers don't support me, so I'm not rolling in money, so I rely on your support. So if you think I'm worth supporting, just go to patreon.com/charlestew. And there are all kinds of rewards for supporting me at various levels, including one-on-one tutoring on any of the subjects I teach, which you can find on my website under courses. And they're generally history of philosophy and anything in objectivism. You can also leave reviews for this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you happen to listen to it. And those make a big difference, so if you can spare a minute or two, leave a review. Thanks for listening. Let's meet again in episode 13.